Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Happy Friday to you. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are in the midst of refuting and reviewing Brock Hollett's book, Debunking Preterism. Now then, just a little bit of a heads up. Since Mr. Hollett bases, an incredible amount of his book on the Olivet discourse, and since I'm currently involved in a study of the Olivet discourse on Monday through Thursday, we're going to cut this review and refutation of his book somewhat short. I'm only going to make about 2 more videos after this one, and I will, in those 2 videos, I will pick out some of the major topics that he introduces. But there's no sense in having to do double references, double application, if you please, and double examination of the Olivet discourse Monday through Thursday, and then examining Mr. Hollett on Friday. So we're going to do that, and after a couple more videos, which will be a total of 15 videos responding to his book, I'm going to be reviewing, responding, and refuting Sam Frost's brand new book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. He just brought this out. This is supposedly the definitive refutation of covenant eschatology, full preterism. It supposedly explains away why all of the time statements of the New Testament don't mean anything at all. As I mentioned in regard to Mr. Hollett's book, you might rename this book Why the Bible Doesn't Mean What It Says. Well, the same could go for Mr. Frost's book. So anyway, you can be looking forward to that. After 2 more videos examining Mr. Hollett's book, we will be examining Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. And it's amazing to be able to say this, but it's absolutely true. I've told you that Mr. Hollett's book is full of incredible logical failures. It is full of exegetical blunders. It is just full of some of the worst sort of eisegesis imaginable. Well, guess what? Mr. Frost's book is every bit as guilty of the same kind of fallacies, and I'm going to show you that, I think, very effectively. Well, in this video, Mr. Hollett has a study, a rather lengthy study, in chapter 5, of the Abomination of Desolation. In our last video, last Friday, we gave you some thoughts on that, our first examination of the doctrine of the Abomination of Desolation. Well, here's something that Mr. Hollett completely and totally overlooks, and it is in reality one of the many Achilles' heels of his futurist view. He examines some of the claims of the preterist view concerning the Abomination of Desolation. And I tell you, he makes some of the most amazing statements. On page 51, he says, most futurists agree with Chilton that the tribulation will be unprecedented and hence without duplication, but disagree with his assessment that it refers to the period of the First Jewish-Roman War, AD 66 to 70. However, the futurist position allows that the Olivet prophecy, quote, listen, you just got to catch this, quote, provides a certain versatility of application sufficient to prompt the first century Jewish saints to flee Judea to escape the onslaught of the Roman armies. Unquote. Folks, that's just simply stunning. Now, in Matthew 24:15, Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let whoever reads understand, then let those who are in Judea flee. Eusebius, a 4th century historian, tells us, based upon a commandment of the Lord, as the Romans approached the city, the Christians fled, and not one of them died. Well, what command of the Lord might they have been obeying? Matthew 24:15 and following. Oh, perhaps Hebrews chapter 13, let us go outside the gates. Oh, maybe Revelation 18:4, come out of her, my people. Bottom line, the only commandment, and the commandment of Hebrews and the commandment of Revelation based upon that singular commandment, is the command of Jesus. When you, his first century saints, would see the abomination, they were to flee. They fled. And Brock Hollett says, well, you know, the futurist view says that there is a certain versatility of application. Where did he get that idea? Did Jesus say, now look, when you see what you think is the abomination, you need to get out. That won't really be it, but if you think it is, you need to flee. Because here's the problem with this, folks. Jesus said that it was expedient for him to go away because if he did not go away, the Holy Spirit could not come. But if he went away, the Father, who knew the day and the hour of the parousia, would send the Holy Spirit. He would guide the apostles, listen to me carefully, he would guide the apostles into all truth and show them things to come. This is John chapter 16, 7 and following. Okay. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 in verse 32, after he had given the signs of his coming, he said, when you see, who's he talking to? He didn't say when they see. He did not say when a future generation sees. He said, when you see these things, know that it, that is his parousia, is nigh, even at the door. Now remember, Jesus also told those apostles that many would come in my name, saying, I am he, and the end has drawn near. Do not believe them. That means that Jesus condemned, as I pointed out in a previous video, Jesus condemned making premature declarations of the nearness of the end. But Jesus told his apostles that the Holy Spirit would guide them into knowing when the time was near. The Holy Spirit sent by the Father who knew the time. And it was those very apostles who, after receiving the Spirit, said, the coming of the Lord has drawn near. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. James 5, 8, and 9. James virtually quotes Matthew 24, 32. Peter, who was there that day, who heard Jesus warn against making premature declarations of the nearness of the end, later said, after hearing Jesus' words, after receiving the inspiration of the Holy Spirit from the Father, who knew the time of the end, said, the end of all things has drawn near. He used the very same language that Jesus warned about making premature declarations. But here's Peter, through the Holy Spirit, saying, the time has drawn near. The end has drawn near. Now, folks, we have to make up our mind. Was Peter, the apostle, inspired by the Holy Spirit, sent by the Father? Was he a false teacher making a premature declaration of the nearness of the end or not? If he was not a failed prophet, if he was not a false prophet, then guess what? That means that the end of all things, as he expressed it, was truly, genuinely, objectively near 2,000 years ago. And guess what? Mr. Brock Hollett's entire book, and oh, by the way, Mr. Sam Frost's book, goes down the tubes. Now, there's another point, a very quick point that I want to make here. Shifting gears. You know, one of my Mustangs back here. Shifting gears. What was the abomination of desolation? I'm not going to go into a long discourse. I've already taken a lot of time this morning. What Mr. Hollett completely, totally overlooks, doesn't say a word about it. And by the way, I haven't read a single dispensational or premillennial writer, author, or speaker ever make a point of this, but it is absolutely critical. The term abomination of desolation literally means, as virtually any Hebrew scholar will verify, the abomination that brings desolation. I would recommend that you get a copy of Brant Petrie's book, Jesus, Tribulation, and the End of Exile. Absolutely fantastic book in many, many ways. Anyway, well, what does that mean? It is the abomination that brings desolation. Now, Mr. Hollett believes that the abomination is some idol or some pagan symbol of some kind set up in the Jerusalem temple, the temple that supposedly will be authorized after the rapture at some point in time in the future. That abomination is set up by the man of sin. He's not a Jew. Right here is the fallacy of Mr. Hollett and virtually all of the millennial views. Folks, an abomination that brings desolation could only be so if it was some heinous crime committed by Israel, by the Jews, that would cause the desolation of the temple. In other words, Israel's sin, not some sin committed by a pagan, but Israel's sin would bring the destruction of the temple. You know, the only time that Yahweh ever allowed anyone, for instance a pagan, into the temple was when Israel had sinned. Do you realize that in somewhere around 63, 64 BC, Pompey, the Roman general, came against Jerusalem and he conquered the city. He did not destroy the city. He did not destroy the temple. He even went into the most holy place and was absolutely astounded that the Jews were so radical in their defense of that temple that had an empty room. But here's the point. The Jews understood that the capturing of Jerusalem by Pompey in 63, 64 BC was a covenantal judgment on Israel for her sin. In other words, her sin brought that judgment. You see the point? There is not a dispensational or premillennial writer that I'm aware of, I may have missed something obviously, that acknowledges that it is Jerusalem's sin, the sin of Israel, to use that broad term Israel, that would cause the desolation of the temple. Thomas I says, well, the Great Tribulation is certainly not a judgment on Israel. It's just pagans coming against Israel. I'm sorry. When pagans came against Israel, it was a covenantal curse for Israel violating Torah. It was their abominable actions that brought desolation. Look, you see that in Matthew chapter 23. In Matthew 23, Jesus pronounced 7 woes on Jerusalem and the temple. 7 sins that he cataloged against them. And then what did he say? Your house is left to you desolate. Sin, desolation. Since Mr. Hollett and virtually all millennialists believe that Israel remains God's covenant people and that Israel is saved from the Great Tribulation, they're innocent victims of the Great Tribulation. The reality of his misidentification of the abomination of desolation is a fatal blow to his millennialism. The abomination of desolation was not, never had been, never could be a sin, an ostensible sin by a pagan that would bring desolation. Oh, by the way, did Antiochus Epiphanes set up what the Maccabees called the abomination? Yes, they did, but here's the point. according to Daniel chapter 8, Israel had already filled up their sin before that ever happened. In other words, sin led to the setting up of that abominable thing. And by the way, Antiochus did not destroy the city and the temple. But that's another issue. Okay, I hope you can see the power of these two realities. Jesus told his apostles, when you see the abomination of desolation, then flee. The disciples saw something and they fled. And their flight was based upon a commandment of the Lord. Number two, the abomination of desolation had to be a sin by Israel that would lead to her desolation, just as Jesus taught in Matthew 23. Okay, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's morning musings. You have a fantastic weekend, Lord willing. We'll see you on Monday.